After working hard with Julian for 10 years, we finally moved from a rental apartment to a luxury villa. But then, he unexpectedly got a system that allowed him to rewind time back to the summer when his first love hadn't died yet. So, without hesitation, he gave up his tens of millions in assets and dragged me back to high school along with him. I decisively broke up with him, but he was confused, at worst. We just work hard and build everything again. What's the big deal? Me, it is a big deal. Hearing that, he grew annoyed. After saving his first love, he applied to the same university as her. Everyone said he was just being petty with me and wanted me to coax him back. But I ignored it, because I knew the time rewind was limited. Change one link in the chain, and the future would change too. 7 days later, we returned to 10 years later, but Julian was dumbfounded. Chapter 1. After the college entrance exam results came out, the school organized a lecture on how to fill out our college applications. When I stepped back onto campus again, it felt like a lifetime ago. Beside me, Julian was fanning himself from the heat, complaining casually, "It was winter just yesterday, and now we're suddenly back to summer. Hard to get used to." I stayed silent for a moment before suddenly saying, "Let's break up." At first, Julian froze when he heard me. It was as if he couldn't believe that the first thing I did after returning to high school, after 10 years of loving him, was to break up with him. Once he processed my words, his brows furrowed instantly. "Celestine, what did you just say?" I turned to face him, looking at his face, 10 years younger, and said with all the restraint I could muster, "I said, break up." Seeing my serious gaze, Julian paused, confusion flashing in his eyes. "What are you acting up for? We're back in high school, 10 years younger, aren't you happy?" "Happy?" I gave a bitter little laugh before finally snapping, "Julian, are you out of your mind? Why would you come back to high school? We worked for so many years to finally succeed. Have you forgotten how much we suffered in between?" I almost wanted to pry open his head and check. Had a zombie eaten his brain? Who in their right mind gives up hard-earned success to go back to having nothing? I was almost shaking with suppressed anger, but Julian only paused briefly before replying lightly, "I haven't forgotten, but wasn't I always with you?" He hesitated for a moment, his eyes dimming, with a faint trace of longing. "I just want to save Celine. She shouldn't have died this summer." I knew exactly who he meant. Celine had sat in front of Julian in class. She had done exceptionally well on the exam, but her family had refused to let her go to college. Unable to bear the despair, she jumped to her death that summer. Yes, it was tragic. I won't deny that. But I barely knew her. Why should I pay for someone else's life with the results of my years of struggle? Seeing my silence, Julian's patience ran out. He even gave a little laugh, like it was absurd, at worst. "We just work hard and do it all over again. Is it really worth making such a fuss?" I took a deep breath, and when I spoke again, my tone was cold. "It's worth it." His face shifted slightly, but before he could say anything, a crisp female voice called from behind, "Julian, the lecture's about to start. If we don't go now, we'll be late." We both turned. A girl with delicate features came into view. When our eyes met, she gave a sweet smile. A breeze stirred her bangs, and the tiny dimple in her cheek made her look endearing. Julian almost instinctively took 2 steps toward her, but remembering me, he turned back and lowered his voice. "You're not actually 18 anymore. Stop being childish. Calm down and go listen to the lecture." Then, without waiting for my reply, he quickly walked over to Celine. The man who had once been steady and composed now looked like an awkward, shy boy, trailing beside her toward the auditorium, leaving me standing there alone. I didn't go to the lecture. I turned and went home. Chapter 2. But sitting on the bus ride home, I couldn't stop the tears from falling. 10 years, a whole decade of effort, gone in a single instant, all the way back to square one. The crushing despair nearly swallowed me whole, slowly dragging my memories back into the past. Julian and I had known each other since childhood. His house was right next door to mine. When we were little, my parents were always fighting about money, and so were his. Whenever the shouting at home got too intense, we'd both run out to the park, sit there eating popsicles for an entire afternoon, and end it with a silly grin at each other. We had so much in common that becoming each other's safe harbor was almost inevitable. After high school, we applied to the same university. We worked part-time together to pay our way through college. And at the right age, without even saying it out loud, we naturally became a couple. By the time we graduated, we naturally got married. Since we were struggling in a big city, money was tight. We didn't have a wedding, just signed the papers. In our hardest year, we squeezed into a leaky rental apartment and dreamed about the future. He propped his arm under my head, the corners of his lips lifting. When I have money in the future, I'll make sure you have a good life. Right then, a drop of water fell with a drip, as if mocking our naive dreams. I couldn't help but laugh. All right then, I want a big villa in the future. He laughed too. Deal. But starting a company wasn't easy. To land a single order, we ran around in the scorching sun looking for partnerships. He even got heatstroke once, and drank so much at a client dinner that he ended up in the hospital. But in the end, we pushed through. We made it. We were worth tens of millions. I thought that was the beginning of our happiness. But one night, a system appeared before Julian. It told him he could rewind time to any point he wanted and change the past. A blue interface floated before us. At first, Julian didn't believe it, but the fact that the system appeared out of thin air was shocking enough. I found it strange, and I didn't want to go back. I frowned and warned him, "Don't believe in that kind of nonsense." But what I didn't expect was, the always rational Julian clicked confirm without a second thought. In an instant, a white light flashed. Right before the dizziness hit, I heard him murmur under his breath, "If I go back, I can save her." That moment, my mind went completely blank. We had been in love for so many years, yet there had always been someone else in his heart. Someone for whom he was willing to give up tens of millions, just to go back and save her. What a grand, noble love. I suddenly felt it was absurd. And yet, I couldn't laugh. Right then, an electronic voice sounded in my head. "Congratulations, host, on returning to the past. But you have only 7 days. As long as you don't alter any cause and effect, you can return to the original future 10 years later. If you change something, the future will change accordingly. Note, if more than 2 people time travel together, only one person will retain their memories, and the system will choose randomly." I froze. So, there was still a way to go back. Chapter 3. I turned back and returned to the school. After all, 10 years of love. It's not something you can just let go of with a snap. When I found Julian, he had just come out of the lecture, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips, saying something to Celine. When he saw me, his gaze paused for a moment, probably still holding a grudge from when I scolded him earlier. He turned his face away, pretending not to see me, and simply said, "Let's go fill out our applications." That we meant him and Celine. Celine brushed her hair back, looking a little shy. "Is it all right to go to your place?" Julian smiled casually. "What's the problem? My parents aren't home." Then, "Okay, Julian." I called his name. He stopped walking. I glanced at Celine, still alive, and for a brief moment, guilt prickled in my chest. But Celine didn't notice the change in my expression. She looked at Julian and asked softly, "Is she your friend?" We weren't in the same class. I only knew her from afar. Julian cast me a glance and answered coolly, "Yeah, we're neighbors." Neighbors. I froze for a second, a sour ache swelling in my chest. The words I wanted to say suddenly stuck in my throat. The summer heat was blazing, yet I felt nothing. Julian, on the other hand, said, "Come on, it's too hot out here." "All right." Celine waved at me. By then, Julian didn't look back. Instead, he thoughtfully hailed a taxi for her. Before, he would always say to me, "Taking the bus is fine, we can squeeze in together." Back then, I thought he was just being frugal. Turns out, he didn't know how to care for someone. The system's words still echoed in my head, but I didn't go after him. Chapter 4. I went home alone. There were still 3 days until the deadline for submitting our college applications. In the past, I had chosen a local university with Julian to avoid a long-distance relationship. But later, when my career started to take off and I traveled to many places, I began to regret not going to a better school back then. Now, With this second chance, I could choose my life all over again. Thinking of that, the anger in my chest finally began to settle. For the next 3 days, I didn't go out until the very last day of application submissions. My best friend Ava asked me to hang out. It had been so long since I'd seen the younger version of her that I agreed without hesitation. We went to see the most popular movie of the year, but unexpectedly, I ran into Julian at the theater. He was holding 2 tickets in his hand. Our eyes met suddenly, catching both of us off guard. He froze for a moment, a flicker of panic in his eyes, but quickly composed himself and walked toward me. Don't misunderstand, Celine's never seen a movie before, so I wanted to take her to one. I nodded calmly. Seeing my distant attitude, Julian stared at me for 2 seconds, a strange irritation flashing across his face. He lowered his voice and asked, "Still mad? We've got our past life's experience. Of course we can succeed faster this time. Why are you making such a big deal out of it?" It wasn't just about this. I looked up at him and said softly, "What if I told you, if you didn't change anything, we could go straight back? Then we'd still be husband and wife." I meant every word, but Julian only scoffed. "Don't joke around, we're already back. And besides, could you really stand by and watch someone die? I never realized you were this cold-blooded." Well, he wasn't wrong. I nodded. "All right, then do as you please. Anyway, if you're going to change things, I will too. Let's just see what our future looks like after 7 days." It was just a moment in time, hardly enough to call suffering, but Julian's face darkened. "Do you have to talk like that?" I was about to retort when Celine came back from the restroom. The moment Julian saw her, he turned away and walked straight toward her. Ava returned with popcorn, and from a distance, she noticed their backs walking together. She looked surprised. "Isn't Julian your boyfriend? Why is he walking with Celine?" "He's not anymore. Not now. And never again." I lowered my gaze as I spoke. The instant my words fell, the 2 people walking ahead suddenly stopped in their tracks. Chapter 5. But he didn't turn around. I didn't care either, and watched the movie I had missed all those years ago with Ava in peace. It was a story about a housewife breaking free from the shackles of her family and finding a new life. By the end of the film, I suddenly remembered how Ava, because of her poor grades, never went to college. She married and had children early. In the end, her husband looked down on her for not having a degree. She became estranged from her son and fell into severe depression. Before she killed herself, she called me. On the other end of the line, she laughed softly, almost puzzled. "Celestine, is a degree really that important?" I was busy with work and answered casually, "It's okay." She didn't mind, paused for a moment, and continued, "Then maybe I should have retaken the exam and gone to college back then." I noticed something off in her tone, but by the time I set my work aside and went back to my hometown to find her, I heard from others that she was already gone. She had been only 27 that year. Thinking of this, I couldn't help turning to look at the youthful, radiant Ava beside me. The girl had her hair tied in a ponytail, her eyes fixed on the movie screen. Even failing the college entrance exam hadn't cast much of a shadow over her. The light from the film reflected in her eyes, bright and full of life. "Ava," I spoke softly. "Yeah?" She turned her head when she heard me. Looking straight at her, I finally made up my mind, pressing down the emotions churning inside. I said, "College is wonderful. How about repeating a year? Then we can still be together." I remembered clearly. She had great talent for design. She shouldn't be trapped in this tiny world. Ava blinked, then scratched her head. "But I don't think I'm cut out for studying." "It's fine. I'll tutor you online when the time comes." Drawing on my years of experience in the working world, I patiently laid out a plan for her future and painted her a dream to chase. Her eyes lit up with pure, guileless belief, and she was persuaded. "All right, I'll try my best." I nodded in satisfaction. Chapter 6. By the time the nearly 3-hour movie ended, it was already dark. As the crowd streamed out of the theater, Julian seemed oddly distracted. "Julian, what are you thinking about?" Celine asked with concern after speaking to him twice without getting a response. Her voice snapped him out of his thoughts. His eyes instinctively swept over the crowd. The place was packed, but there was no sign of a familiar figure. Maybe Celestine had watched a different movie. That thought crossed his mind as he said aloud, "Nothing." Celine smiled, then seemed to think of something. A faint blush rose to her pale cheeks. "Since you treated me to the movie, let me treat you to some spicy ramen." Julian's brows furrowed instinctively. It had been ages since he'd eaten something like that, and he didn't particularly want to. He was about to refuse. But then he thought of Celestine's deliberately distant attitude, and a wave of irritation welled up in his chest. It was just starting over again. Did she really have to make such a big deal out of it? Meeting Celine's expectant gaze, he nodded. "All right." Hearing this, the girl's face lit up. She twisted the hem of her shirt between her fingers, took a few steps forward, and teased, "Julian, when school starts, let's go together." In his previous life, Julian had applied to a well-regarded local university, but this time, when filling out his application, he thought it over and decided it wouldn't hurt to try something different. So he casually chose the same university as Celine. After all, he had the advantage of experience from his past life. Thinking of this, he glanced at his phone, feeling an inexplicable restlessness. Celestine still hadn't messaged him. Was she not even curious about which school he'd chosen? Or had she still applied to the local one? At that thought, most of his irritation faded, but he still said, "Sure, but we'll have to bring someone else along." "Your neighbor girl?" Celine asked. Julian hesitated for a moment, then said casually, "Yeah." He hadn't completely forgiven her yet. He'd wait until she calmed down before telling anyone they were together. Chapter 7. That night, I heard that Julian had applied to the same university as Celine. If it had been before, I would have definitely gone to ask him about it. But now, I didn't care. After all, I hadn't applied to the local university either. But what I didn't expect was, just as I was about to go to sleep, Julian suddenly called me. "Celestine, I posted on Twitter about which university I was applying to. Did you see it?" His tone wasn't exactly pleasant, but I suppose he was offering me a step down. I was half asleep and answered offhandedly, Yes, I'd seen it, but I had no intention of going to the same school as him." Hearing my reply, he seemed to exhale in relief, muttering, "Then we'll still be at the same university. It'll be just like before. Even if we really go back 7 days later, we'll still be husband and wife." Muttering on, so annoying. I hung up the phone without another word, turned over, and went back to sleep. The next few days passed quickly, afraid that something might happen later. I drew up a meticulous plan for myself, until the 7th day, when the system appeared. I was sorting through the notebooks I'd used in senior year of high school. A cold, mechanical voice suddenly sounded in my ear. "Time is up. Opening the return portal now." My fingers paused. The densely written pages were ruffled by the wind passing through the corridor. The edges of the paper, still half new in the summer 10 years ago, rustled instead of the yellowed crispness they should have had. The next moment, a blinding white light flashed before my eyes. My heart pounded uncontrollably. What kind of future was waiting for me? Chapter 8. Meanwhile, next door, Julian leaned back on a worn red leather sofa, clutching his phone tightly. His brows furrowed as he scrolled through the chat over and over. But the conversation still sat there, stuck on messages from days ago. Was the signal bad? Or was the network unstable? He instinctively blamed it on the internet, shaking his phone irritably. But even when the page refreshed successfully, no new messages came in. Before, Celestine would send him plenty of texts, little everyday things, asking if he'd eaten yet, asking what he was doing. But now, the chat box was empty. An inexplicable unease rose in his chest, though he quickly pushed it down. Now that he had time to calm down, he had to admit he wasn't entirely used to this either. Back when they'd had money, they only used the best things. Now, he was back in a rundown little house. Every purchase meant checking his balance, and just taking a taxi ate up an entire day's worth of meals. It made sense for Celestine to be angry, but her temper was a bit too much. Julian rubbed his forehead in helplessness. After a while, he got up, planning to go find Celestine. But before he could take more than a few steps, a familiar white light flashed before his eyes. When the light faded, he froze, staring at the scene in front of him. Chapter 9. 10 years can change a city beyond recognition. The low old buildings had given way to towering skyscrapers. Julian stared at the massive, crystal-clear digital screen in the city center, first in shock, then in delight. Had he come back again? No. What about Celine? He pulled out his phone and quickly scrolled through his contacts. Soon, he found a familiar name. He opened Celine's Twitter page and saw recent photos of her wearing a pretty spaghetti-strap dress, sipping coffee. Compared to the shy, youthful girl from 10 years ago, she now wore makeup and had grown into a much more mature woman. He really had changed the past. But soon, Julian realized something was wrong. Why wasn't his phone the latest model? And he looked down at his clothes, not designer brands. A strange unease spread through him, but he shoved it down, hailed a taxi, and headed straight for the villa he used to live in. There were people in the villa. Julian felt a bit of relief. Of course, this was still right. As long as he found Celestine, everything would return to normal. He knocked on the door, and it took quite a while before someone came to open it. It was winter, and the damp southern cold seeped into the bones. A gust of wind blew past, biting through him. Shivering from the cold, Julian called out impatiently, "Celestine, you." Before he could finish, a middle-aged man stepped out, looking puzzled. "Who are you looking for?" Julian's pupils contracted, his throat tightening. How could this be? Chapter 10. After being escorted out of the villa by the man and a security guard, Julian stood dazed on the asphalt road, frozen in place. How was this possible? Hadn't he returned to 10 years later? Why wasn't the villa his anymore? And where was Celestine? Yes, Celestine. He fumbled for his phone, his cold stiffened fingers flipping frantically through his contacts, desperate to find her. But no matter how he searched, her name wasn't there. He couldn't even remember her phone number anymore. Cursing under his breath, he hailed another taxi and went to the company. This time, it was as he had expected. The company still existed, but the place was sparsely staffed, its scale far smaller than before. A few employees noticed him, offering only a polite, "President, where's Celestine?" He didn't recognize most of the people there, but he didn't care about that now. Pushing down his emotions as he asked, he remembered, at this point in time, he and Celestine had been building the company together. She had been the vice president. Logically, she should be here. Maybe she was out meeting clients? But before the thought could settle, the person in front of him gave him a strange look. "Celestine? Who's that? There's no one by that name in our company." It was like a bolt of lightning split the sky above him. Julian's heart seemed to stop beating in that instant. Chapter 11. It had changed. Everything had changed. Realizing this, Julian forced himself to stay calm. After walking out of the company, he began calling his old classmates one by one, asking about Celestine's whereabouts. Someone did know, and casually told him, "Oh, Celestine? I heard she and her best friend moved to City A. Business seems to be going pretty well for them." Julian's grip on his phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. He suddenly remembered what Celestine had told him. If nothing changed, they could return to 10 years later. But he had changed things. Was this the butterfly effect? But they had been together for more than 10 years. 10 years of love and shared memories couldn't just be fake. How could she really not want him anymore? Swallowing hard, he tried to smother the growing unease in his chest. After hanging up, he started frantically scrolling through his phone. His alma mater was still the one he had applied to, the same as Celine's. He had a company, but the company's group chat had only a few members. He had no idea how he had spent these 10 years. Why hadn't he become the CEO of a publicly listed company like in his previous life? He should have had more experience this time. He had to go ask Celestine. Chapter 12. When the receptionist called to say there was a man downstairs claiming to be my boyfriend. I was having lunch with Ava. At the mention, Ava froze. Then her eyes went wide. "Seal, since when have you been dating someone without telling me?" I was just as confused. "I haven't." "Really?" She clearly didn't believe me. Setting down her chopsticks, she started pressing. "Is it that puppy eyes guy?" She meant the boy next door, a college student with a pair of very clear, puppy-like eyes. I shook my head. "Then is it the Hermes guy?" That was a rich second-generation suitor who loved giving me Hermes gifts. I shook my head again. Then is it? She rattled off a whole list of names, leaving me with a black line across my forehead. I'd been running around so busy lately that most of those people were just acquaintances, nothing more. When I denied them all, Ava snorted, stood up, and left her food untouched. Then I have to see who's trying to stick to our Celestine. Curious myself, I told the receptionist to let the person up. Soon, a handsome young man appeared in front of me. One look, and I recognized him. My childhood friend, Julian. The moment he saw me, there was a flicker of excitement in his eyes. He walked quickly over, instinctively grasping my shoulders. Celestine, what's going on? Why is our home gone? I stared at him blankly, completely at a loss. Beside me, Ava took a closer look and then realized who he was. Well, if it isn't our childhood buddy from 100 years ago. Julian ignored Ava's teasing. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on me. I pushed him away, taking a step back, my brows knitting together. Julian, what are you talking about? We've been broken up for 10 years, haven't we? The instant my words fell, the color drained from his face. Chapter 13. Meeting my unfamiliar gaze. Julian's eyes trembled violently, his lips quivering as he repeated, broken up, for 10 years? I neither confirmed nor denied it. It was Ava who asked another question. Oh right. Weren't you pretty close with Celine back then? What? You two didn't end up together? I listened calmly, showing no reaction. At her words, Julian seemed to suddenly realize something. His expression relaxed, and he explained, You're still mad? It was only 7 days. There's nothing between me and Celine. What mad? 7 days? I had no idea why. After 10 years, Julian would suddenly show up and say a whole bunch of nonsense to me. But I had heard from a classmate in passing. After graduating from college, Julian went to City C to start a business. But it hadn't gone smoothly, lacking the necessary expertise. Few companies were willing to work with him. Was my ex suddenly coming to see me, just to borrow money? My expression turned a little complicated. All right, just tell me, how much do you need to borrow? I cut off his rambling, caught off guard. Julian froze for a moment. What? I sighed. Julian, for the sake of growing up together, I can help you once, but you need to understand, we've had nothing to do with each other for a long time. Next time you want to borrow money, don't come to me. Maybe my words were a little harsh. The man's expression darkened with irritation. Celestine, how long are you going to keep pretending? We're married. Before he could finish, a clear, pleasant male voice interrupted. Sorry to intrude. Everyone turned their heads. A tall young man, about 188 meters, stood in the doorway. Broad shoulders, narrow waist, though he wore just a simple t-shirt and trousers. His presence radiated an effortless magnetism. His puppy eyes were dark and bright at the same time. Why was Sam here? I was stunned for a moment. Ever since I started working, if I wasn't eating with Ava, I'd often forget to eat entirely, ending up with an aching stomach. After meeting Sam, he lived next door. He would often bring me food. Over time, we'd gotten familiar, seeing the several people standing in my office. Sam didn't seem awkward at all, calmly carrying a bag. He walked in naturally and said, Brought you some fruit. Not eating fruit isn't good for you. What time do you get off today? I bought ribs, can make you sweet and sour ribs. My face warmed slightly, but I couldn't just turn him down. 6 o'clock, I guess. Ava covered her mouth, smothering a laugh. Julian stared blankly. It took him quite a while before he reacted, blurting out in disbelief, You cheated on me? The moment those words fell, the entire room went silent. Chapter 14. Even with the thick skin I'd built up over the years, Julian's words still left me dumbstruck. What the hell? If I could, I'd go back to 10 minutes ago and tell the receptionist to throw him out on the spot. Sam's sword-straight brows knit slightly, his assessing gaze landing on Julian with a trace of scrutiny. Ava stared for a few seconds, then looked at Julian like he was insane. Julian, you and Celestine broke up over 10 years ago. How can there be any talk of cheating? Are you dreaming? Julian glared at Ava. We've been married for years. I even know exactly where the moles on her body are. His voice wasn't quiet, with everyone's eyes on us. Passing employees were starting to peek in curiously. My expression froze, and an inexplicable pang of sadness rose in my chest, but it was quickly replaced by cold indifference. Julian, I don't know what madness you're caught up in, but we broke up a long time ago. I could never have married you. If you don't believe me, check your marriage record. Fine, I'll check. Julian pulled out his phone. Time ticked by. His face went from flushed to pale. In the end, he kept refreshing again and again, muttering, "Impossible." I remember clearly. We got our certificate after graduating from college. We didn't have a wedding back then. I had every reason to suspect that after his business failed, he'd gone mentally unstable, so I promptly called security, intending to have him removed. It would still take a few minutes for them to arrive. Julian suddenly turned back to me, his eyes bloodshot. "Have you really forgotten?" "Forgotten what?" I'd lost my patience. "I haven't forgotten anything." As he moved to step toward me, a tall figure blocked my view, cutting off Julian's line of sight. In the next instant, a fist slammed forward. Julian was knocked flat to the ground. Without looking back, Sam kept me shielded behind him, his voice taut. "Be careful, this guy might be mentally unstable." I had nothing to say to that. Sounded pretty reasonable to me. Chapter 15. I remembered it all clearly. After graduating from high school, I was admitted to my ideal university in another city, majoring in management. In college, whenever I didn't have class, I tutored Ava. In just 1 year, her score jumped from a little over 400 to more than 600. She became my junior at the same university. In our graduating year, I applied for a startup fund, and together with Ava, we founded a clothing company. Ava had a real talent for design, so she handled the clothing designs, while I took care of marketing. From starting out with only a handful of orders, we eventually built our own brand. Bit by bit, we grew the business. Every so often, looking back, Ava would grow sentimental. "If it hadn't been for you insisting I go to college, I'd probably be back home now, married with kids." I'd long forgotten exactly why I'd been so determined to push her toward university, but hearing her say that, I only smiled and replied, "The future will be even better. MHM. Her brows arched into a smile, her face shining with youth and confidence. That was where the memory ended. I didn't think there was anything I'd forgotten, and if there was, it couldn't be anything important. Chapter 16. Once Julian was escorted out, the office returned to its usual quiet. Ava, still fuming, spat. "See? A proper ex should act like they're dead." I pressed my lips together and said nothing. After dropping off the fruit, Sam left without asking anything more. Even though I no longer cared about Julian, my good mood had been ruined. After work, Sam came to pick me up and brought my favorite wisteria flowers. When he handed them to me, his ears turned slightly red. Seeing this, Ava gave me a teasing wink and whispered, "Your neighbor boy looks cold, but he's actually pretty thoughtful." I couldn't help but laugh. "I'm heading out. Then, bye." Ava waved as I left. Sam started the car, the figures outside the window receding. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Ava turn back into the company, and I let out a quiet sigh. She had no interest in marriage at all. She was even more career-focused than I was. But that was probably a good thing. "What do you want for dinner tonight?" Suddenly, his voice came from beside me. I turned my head and saw that the light was red. Sam tilted his head slightly to look at me. I had expected him to ask at least something about Julian, but instead, he asked that. "Anything's fine." "All right, then I'll make tomato scrambled eggs, sweet and sour ribs, and loofah soup. Sound good?" The light turned green. Sam turned back to the road, focused on driving. I watched his profile, opening my mouth to speak, but in the end, said nothing. Chapter 17. I hadn't planned to develop anything serious with Sam. My parents' failed marriage had left me with little faith in marriage, and the childhood friend I had once relied on so much had ended up as just another breakup. I had thought I would simply spend my life with my career. I had told Sam this plainly, but Sam refused to give up. He said feelings could be nurtured slowly. If 5 years wasn't enough, he would give it 10. He would cook me 3 meals a day, and when I was feeling lazy, he would clean the house for me. Gently, he wove himself into my life, lost in thought. I didn't notice the car had stopped. "We're home." His voice pulled me back, and I followed him into the elevator. While he cooked dinner, my phone suddenly received a friend request. It was from Julian. I hit decline, but he wouldn't give up, sending request after request. Finally, I got annoyed and hit accept. Almost immediately, the typing indicator appeared. "Celestine, there's really nothing between me and Celine." "That again?" He said it like I actually cared. I replied, "What's that got to do with me?" Then I blocked him. About half an hour later, Sam's dinner was ready. The smell drew me into the kitchen, and I leaned against the doorway, watching the tall young man in an apron. My lips curved in a teasing smile. "Hey, you've really got that husband material vibe going, do I?" Sam turned his head, dark hair falling over bright eyes that gleamed like a dog happy to be praised by its owner. I almost wanted to pat his head, but with our height difference, it wasn't possible. Sensing my regret, he straightened from his work, then suddenly bent down, offering his head toward me. I froze for a moment, my heartbeat picking up. Then I reached out and ruffled his hair. His hair was a bit coarse, not particularly pleasant to the touch, but my heart felt satisfied. The corners of my lips lifted as I helped him carry the dishes. "Let's eat." "All right." Chapter 18. After dinner, I curled up on the sofa, watching TV without really paying attention, just flipping to whatever came on. This was my way of relaxing. When Sam finished washing the dishes, he came out and naturally sat down beside me. I waited for a while, but he didn't say anything. On impulse, I asked, "Aren't you curious about that man today?" Even though what Julian said was baseless, he'd spoken with such certainty, as if we really had been married, as if there had truly been something between us. At my words, the man beside me paused for a moment. "I don't know him, but I believe you. Of course, if you're willing to tell me, I'd be willing to listen." I turned my head toward him, meeting his earnest gaze. After a moment, I let out a small laugh. "I've never been married. He's my childhood friend. We broke up 10 years ago. Just one simple syllable, yet full of trust. I was momentarily speechless. What should I do? He actually seemed a little too good. Made me want to bully him. Chapter 19. And I really did bully him. On the sofa, I pinned Sam beneath me, staring straight into his eyes, then lightly bit his lips. After all, I was 28, not some little girl. I might still be shy, but I'd long been used to being in control, always wanting to be on top. The man's Adam's apple bobbed wildly. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse. "I want a title. Depends on how you perform." He was only in his senior year of college, 22, young and full of energy. Soon enough, he turned the tables. Our lips and tongues tangled, pulling thin, glistening threads between us. Later on, I was still on top, but he, relying on his strength, began to push upward from below. I couldn't keep steady, feeling at times like he might topple me completely, but his hands clamped firmly on my waist, making it impossible to escape, until we reached the peak together. Chapter 20. Sam and I officially got together. A year later, we registered our marriage. I hadn't intended to make a big deal out of it, but he wouldn't hear of anything less. In the days leading up to the wedding, Sam busied himself with every detail, making sure everything was perfect, even hiring a designer to create a custom wedding dress for me. I was rather helpless about it, but it would be a lie to say I wasn't moved. Ava served as my bridesmaid, grinning as she said, "Wishing you two a lifetime of happiness." I smiled in return and tossed her the bouquet, not because I wished for her to marry soon. With countless roses in bloom, I hoped she would always remain herself, like the wind, forever free, like fire, forever burning bright. Julian, extra. The message Julian sent came back with a red exclamation mark. He stared blankly at the screen, sitting in his rented apartment, lost in thought. Suddenly, his phone buzzed again. He quickly lowered his head to check, only to see it was from Celine. "Julian, want to go out and hang out?" Julian stared at the message, his mind still stuck in that summer 10 years ago. He had long noticed that Celine had feelings for him. To be honest, he wasn't entirely unmoved. Before going back in time, he had even thought, if time could turn back, he might try dating Celine. An untouchable first love from youth, when recalled after achieving success, was always tinged with regret. So when he really returned to the past, he indulged himself in treating Celine well. But when it came to marriage, he still wanted Celestine. He had grown up with Celestine, they were each other's most trusted and dependable person. More than that, they had gone through so much together. He believed Celestine could never leave him. Back when they'd squeezed into a leaky apartment, with no wedding, no diamond ring, they had nothing. Nothing but the leaky roof above their heads. And yet Celestine would lie in his arms and dream with him about the future. But he hadn't expected Celestine's words, "Not my boyfriend now, and never in the future," would turn out to be prophetic. It turned out time travel had a limit. They had returned together to 10 years later. But everything had changed. Julian tried to recall the professional knowledge he learned back then, but his mind was completely blank. Panic crept into his heart. A terrifying thought exploded in his mind, making his scalp go numb. They had indeed returned to that time, but they weren't reborn. They had gone back to 10 years earlier as their future selves, making different choices on behalf of their past selves. His past self didn't have any so-called success experience, and would make different moves based on those changed decisions. Even if he started a company like before, it would be hard to succeed. As for the so-called experience, the reason he had been able to climb to the peak of success wasn't just his own effort, but also Celestine's unwavering support for 10 years, bringing him hope every time he wanted to give up. Realizing this, he suddenly clutched his head and let out a pained, guttural roar. If he could, he would go back to the moment Celestine had told him not to believe in the system, and he would never choose agree again. Story 2. Oliver and I used to be the perfect couple, until the day his best friend went missing. To fulfill the promise he made, Oliver spent the next 10 years taking care of his missing brother's wife and child. But every act of care for them came at the cost of abandoning me. It wasn't until the day he left me stranded in the freezing cold for someone else that my heart truly died. But once I finally let go, it was him who regretted it. As he watched me walk away, soaring far from him, he broke down, crying his heart out. Chapter 01. The year I married Oliver, his best friend, Sam, suddenly went missing. Oliver took on the responsibility of caring for Sam's wife and child. Outsiders praised him for his loyalty and applauded me for my generosity. But as time went on, our relationship grew increasingly strained. On our 5th wedding anniversary, I waited for him for a long time. I waited from a brightly lit evening until the house was shrouded in darkness. The dishes on the table went from steaming hot to cold and then were reheated. Over and over, each one was Oliver's favorite. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I finally received a call from Oliver. "Miranda, Lucas suddenly got sick. I'm at the hospital with Sophia. I won't be coming home for the next few days." Just as I was about to respond, I heard Sophia's voice. "Oliver, what should I do? If anything happens to Lucas, how can I ever face Sam?" Her voice carried a sobbing tone, muffled, as if something heavy weighed down on her. There was a buzzing noise on the other end of the line. After a moment, I heard Oliver's voice again. "It's okay, Sophia. Don't be afraid. I'm here with you." With that, the call ended. I didn't even have a chance to say a word. I stared blankly at the darkened phone screen, my mind painting a vivid picture based on what I'd just heard. I could see Sophia's face buried in Oliver's chest, and Oliver gently patting her back. To anyone else, they would appear to be a loving couple. And me, his legal wife, was just an outsider, the one standing between them, the unwanted obstacle. Chapter 02. I saw Oliver again a few days later, when I went to visit the sick Lucas, standing at the entrance to the hospital room. I was about to push the door open when I heard a child's tender voice. "Uncle Oliver, can you be my dad? Lucas wants you to be my daddy." I stood at the doorway, holding my breath, waiting for Oliver's response. "Of course, I am your daddy, Lucas." My hand paused mid-action as I reached for the door. my heart instinctively tightening. I clenched my fist, my nails digging painfully into the flesh of my palm. It wasn't until the sting registered that I stopped. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside, Oliver and Sophia were sitting side by side next to Lucas's bed. Oliver was holding an apple, carefully peeling it, not for Lucas, but for Sophia. As I watched Sophia casually take the apple from him, my mind couldn't help but drift back to that night. That night, I suddenly came down with a high fever. I called Oliver at least 10 times, but he didn't answer any of my calls. In the end, I had to take myself to the hospital. I stayed there for 3 days. Oliver only came to see me once. I had asked him if he could bring me an apple. He brushed me off with, "Miranda, I'm not good at peeling apples. Let the nurse do it for you." With that, he left. Later, I found out that the night he ignored my calls, he was celebrating Lucas's birthday. During the 3 days I was in the hospital, he spent them with Sophia and Lucas, and the one time he came to visit me, it was only because Lucas had caught a cold, and they happened to be at the same hospital. It wasn't until today, seeing him carefully peeling that apple for Sophia, that I realized he had never been bad at peeling apples. He just wasn't willing to do it for me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, and no one even noticed me. It wasn't until I took a few steps forward that Oliver finally looked up and saw me. "Miranda, what are you doing here?" he asked, almost surprised. Before I could respond, Sophia's expression suddenly changed. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes as she softly asked, "Miranda, did you hear everything? Oliver was just joking with Lucas. You know, Lucas has never had a father." So, her voice trailed off, trembling with a hint of a sob. "Enough, Miranda. What do you want?" Oliver stepped in front of Sophia protectively, his eyes impatiently fixed on me, as if I was the intruder between them. I said nothing. I simply placed the fruit basket down and left. It wasn't until I stepped out of the room that I collapsed onto the cold floor, exhausted. The pain in my palms brought me back to my senses. Only then did I notice the blood. The trail of blood from my hands stretched from inside the hospital room to where I sat outside. Chapter 03. After that day, one night, Oliver came home of his own accord. He wrapped his arms around me, just like he used to, burying his face in my shoulder. "You know, Miranda, Sophia is my best friend's wife. I can't just leave them on their own." That day, I only said yes to Lucas because I couldn't bear to see him like that. "But I'll always be your husband, Miranda." I wanted to push Oliver away, but he held me tighter and tighter. I didn't have the strength to resist, so I just let him hold me. For the next few weeks, Oliver came home for dinner every night and left for work with me in the morning. It felt as if everything had returned to how it once was. Sophia didn't appear again to disrupt my life with Oliver. A week before my birthday, Oliver suddenly told me that to make up for the wedding anniversary he ruined, he planned to take me back to Iceland on my birthday. Iceland was where we first met. It was where Oliver and I fell in love and made promises to be together forever. I thought this was Oliver's way of making things right, until I saw Sophia and Lucas at the airport. Oliver gave me an awkward look, opened his mouth, but said nothing. Standing next to him, Sophia casually tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her smile bright. "Miranda, it's all because of Lucas being such a handful. When he heard Oliver was taking you to Iceland, he cried and insisted on coming along. I hope we aren't disrupting your trip with Oliver," she said sweetly. I looked at Oliver. He mouthed the words, "Please, honey, don't embarrass me." I stared at Oliver's ridiculous expression, and though I wanted to burst out laughing at the absurdity of it all, I swallowed my frustration and answered, "Of course. It's no problem. You don't have your own private jet. After all, Oliver and I can give you both a lift. It's no trouble at all." Ignoring the darkening expression on Sophia's face, I walked straight onto the plane. When we landed in Iceland, Oliver and I planned to go back to the little house we had shared during our time there. That house held all the memories of our love in Iceland. But Sophia, once again, spoke up, casually mentioning that she and Lucas hadn't arranged for any accommodations. This time, Oliver frowned and said, "I'll help you book a hotel. I'll have someone take you and Lucas there shortly." Chapter 04. The first night in our little home with Oliver was so wonderful and peaceful, until the early hours of the morning. I suddenly woke up and found that Oliver wasn't by my side. I watched the clock on the wall move from 12 to 5, and only then did I hear movement at the door. Oliver came in holding Lucas, with Sophia following behind him. Up until that moment, I had never imagined anyone else entering this house besides Oliver and me. There were so many memories Oliver and I had made here. We would curl up on the couch together, watching horror movies, screaming at the ghosts, and then trembling as we held each other. We would cook together in the kitchen, tasting all sorts of weird dishes we made, only to end up agreeing to go out and eat instead. Oliver and I had promised that this would always be our secret place, a place just for the two of us. But today, Oliver broke that promise. Looking at the two additional people, my heart ached. Oliver told me that Lucas had suddenly come down with a high fever, and Sophia, unfamiliar with the area, had no other choice but to come here with him. I stared at Oliver quietly and said calmly, "Get out, Oliver. Take those two people and leave immediately." Oliver tried to approach me, but I pushed him away with one hand. At that moment, Sophia timidly stepped forward and said, "Oliver, maybe it's better if we leave. I can take care of Lucas by myself." Oliver didn't respond to Sophia, just stared at me coldly. Then he took Lucas and Sophia and went straight to open one of the rooms. Watching him, a bitter taste filled my mouth. I forced back the tears that were about to fall and started packing my clothes in silence. By the time Oliver came back out, I had already finished packing my suitcase. He rushed forward and grabbed it from me, letting out a sigh before saying, "Miranda, you used to be such a kind girl. You were willing to help anyone. Why can't you help Sophia and Lucas? Sam is gone. I have to take care of his wife and child. How else will I face him in the afterlife?" Hearing Oliver's familiar way of talking, I could no longer hold back the emotions surging within me. "Oliver, does taking care of your brother's wife and child really have to go this far? On our wedding anniversary, you were with her. When I was sick, you were with her. And now, you've brought her here. What am I to you, Oliver? I'm asking you, what am I to you? Miranda, why are you being so unreasonable? Sophia has nothing left. But you still have." I didn't hear the rest of his words. I grabbed my luggage and walked out the door. Just as Oliver was about to chase after me, I heard Sophia stop him. "Oliver, Lucas is crying for you." I could hear Oliver pacing back and forth, but when the door slammed shut with a crisp sound, my heart died completely. If Oliver had chased after me, he would have found that I hadn't gone far. I was just downstairs. The moment I stepped out of the house, I made a bet. If Oliver came after me, I would forgive everything that had happened today. If he didn't, I would ask for a divorce. It was clear I had lost the bet. Before I left, I stood in the snow and looked up one last time at what used to be my home. The lights were still on. The house hadn't changed, but the people inside had. Chapter 05. The day after I sent Oliver the divorce papers, he found my hotel in Iceland. He banged on the door furiously, crying and begging to see me. After days of harassment, I finally called the police. Oliver was taken away by the officers outside, despite repeatedly explaining in English that he was my husband. But the police acted like they couldn't hear him. That's because when I called, I told them a crazy man was pretending to be my husband and harassing me every day by banging on the door. I knew they wouldn't hold Oliver for long, so when I found a note stuffed under my door 3 days later, I wasn't surprised at all. In the note, Oliver asked me to retrace the route we took years ago while chasing the Northern Lights. I was going to throw it away, but when I saw the line where he promised to sign the divorce papers if we completed the journey, I changed my mind. I decided to meet him one last time. I arrived at the starting point where we had once chased the auroras. After getting on the snowmobile, Oliver still seemed to hope this would be his chance to reconcile, clinging to me like a shadow. But I had no time for his nonsense. I twisted the throttle and left him behind. As the chase neared its end, the snowmobile made a few sharp sounds and came to a stop. I thought it was Oliver's doing, so I turned around, ready to confront him. But to my surprise, I saw someone unexpected. It was Sophia. What shocked me even more was that she had brought Lucas, who was still sick. in weather that was over 30 degrees below zero. Chapter 06. Oliver was clearly just as shocked by Sophia's crazy behavior. He grabbed Lucas and yelled, "Sophia, what are you doing?" Sophia mumbled for a moment before finally saying, "Lucas." Lucas said he wanted to see you. So I. Her excuse was so weak that even Oliver, with his brain clouded by foolishness, could see through it. He held Lucas close and scolded Sophia, telling her to hurry up and go back with him. Sophia, however, quickly responded, "Oliver, my car broke down. Can you take Lucas and me back?" Oliver checked and found that her car had indeed broken down, so he turned to me with an apologetic smile and said, "Miranda, I'll take them back first. I promise I'll come back for you soon." Seeing him make the same choice once again, my heart felt numb, but what I didn't expect was that after waiting in the snow for what seemed like forever, there was still no sign of Oliver. It wasn't until the magnificent auroras lit up the dark sky that I realized I had been abandoned again. Abandoned in the freezing cold. Abandoned at the very place where he had first confessed his love to me. And to make matters worse, my flashlight was running out of power. I was in the middle of nowhere. I would have to walk several kilometers through the snow before reaching the starting point and seeing another person. It seemed that this time, Oliver didn't just want to break my heart, he wanted to take my life too. I followed the faint tire tracks back, the dim light of my flashlight barely illuminating anything. I kept stumbling on rocks, falling face first into the snow. Sharp stones left cuts all over my exposed hands, marking them with bloody streaks. I ignored the pain in my body and just kept walking, until I started to feel colder, and my consciousness grew heavier. This time, I didn't get up. I watched as the darkness slowly swallowed me whole. Chapter 07. I didn't die after all. I woke up in the hospital. The nurse told me that a man with a Chinese face had saved me, but he didn't leave any information. "I regret to inform you that you have had a miscarriage due to the amount of time you spent in the snow." My English has always been good, but this time, I couldn't understand the words coming out of the nurse's mouth. It wasn't until she repeated it that I caught the word miscarriage. I had a miscarriage. A baby just over a month old, who came and went quietly. He left without even saying hello to me. My menstrual cycle has always been irregular, and when I didn't have my period for the past month, I thought it was just hormonal imbalance. It turns out there was a little mischief maker in my belly. I thought my heart could no longer feel pain, but the dull ache in my chest told me otherwise. My heart hurt deeply. Just then, my phone screen lit up on the bedside table. I saw a photo from Sophia, an image of a half-naked Oliver and Sophia together. I stared at the photo, no longer able to control my emotions that were on the verge of collapse. I clenched my fist and pounded my chest, harder and harder, until my hand went numb. Tears slowly soaked the paper in my hand. It was the only proof that my baby had ever existed. "Oliver, from today onward, I'm going to make you feel the pain I once felt, tenfold. That's the only way to repay you for the 2 lives lost because of you, the one who died in the snow, and our only child." Chapter 08. I knew Oliver would come looking for me. So the next day, I deliberately chose a white dress and sat by the window, gazing at the snow-covered ground outside. When I heard footsteps behind me, I turned around, letting just the right amount of tears well up in my eyes. "Oliver, our baby is gone." He was clearly stunned. When I handed him the hospital report, he took it with trembling hands. His pupils contracted, and his eyes turned bloodshot, veins bulging on the hand that held the report. He didn't dare look up. He just held my hand, muttering, "Miranda, it's my fault. It's me. It's me. Enough." I harshly flung Oliver's hand away. I thought I could hold it in, but I didn't expect that my disgust for Oliver had reached this level. I didn't want to hear his voice anymore, and I didn't want any further contact with him, as long as he was in the same room as me. I felt sick to my stomach. "Oliver, do you know who killed our child? It wasn't anyone else, it was you. Where were you last night? What were you doing? Do you need me to remind you?" Oliver suddenly dropped to his knees, and tears the size of pearls fell one by one. He stammered through his explanation. Miranda, you have to believe me. I would never do something like that. You're the only one in my heart. Miranda, I've been wrong. I kept thinking about how pitiful Sophia and Lucas were after Sam died. I thought, you still have me, and even if you were hurt now, I'd make it up to you twice in the future. The future? Why waste so much time on you just to be abandoned again and again? I didn't want to argue anymore. I just stared at him coldly. I only saw their suffering, and I took advantage of your love for me. Thinking you'd never leave me, I abandoned you over and over again. Miranda, my wife. I'm a scumbag. I'm a bastard. Please, give me a chance to make it up to you. Miranda. I didn't want to hear it anymore, so I called the nurse to have him removed from the room. Chapter 09. In the remaining weeks in Iceland, Oliver clung to me every day. He would buy a bouquet of flowers from the florist every day and leave it at my door. He traveled to over a dozen places in Iceland, searching for foods I used to like. He begged for my forgiveness again and again, asking what he could do to win me back. Finally, I opened the door and told him, if you can walk out from where you left me, all by yourself, then I'll give you a chance. Oliver hesitated, but just as I was closing the door, he held it open and said, Miranda, wait for me to come back. I didn't know if he ever went, and I didn't care. It was just an excuse to get rid of Oliver. 2 days later, at the airport, I saw a news report from Iceland. It said that a Chinese man had attempted to walk alone at night to chase the auroras and was only found by rescue workers today. The Chinese face in the news was none other than Oliver and Sophia. I tossed my coffee into the trash and headed straight for the boarding gate. Today was the day I left Iceland. A week after returning home, I received an unexpected call inviting me to meet. It was Sophia, asking to meet at a cafe. When I arrived at the cafe, Sophia pulled her usual tricks again. Miranda, I know what happened was wrong, both on my part and Oliver's, but you should never have encouraged him to go there. Do you even realize he almost died out there? I watched Sophia, visibly upset, and turned my phone screen towards her. Sophia, let me tell you something good. I've already sent those pictures of you and Oliver to everyone associated with Sam, as well as the media, including Sam's parents. What do you think they'll feel when they see the woman who supposedly stayed faithful to Sam in public, lying in bed with another man in the blink of an eye? Miranda, how could you do this? Don't you care about your own reputation? You're such a shameless, despicable person. Seeing Sophia acting like a scorned woman, I couldn't help but want to laugh. Sophia thought I was too concerned about my reputation to actually send the photos, which was why she had the nerve to send them to me so openly. But she forgot one thing: when someone has died once, there's nothing left to fear. Thanks for the compliment. I turned and walked out of the cafe. Sophia, this is just the beginning. Chapter 10. I knew Sophia's life would be tough after this, but I never expected an even bigger scandal to explode. Lucas isn't Sam's biological son. When Sophia announced she was pregnant, it was only a week after Sam had gone missing. Sam's parents were overjoyed when they heard the news. After all, this was supposedly Sam's posthumous child. Even though Sophia gave birth prematurely, everyone assumed it was due to her overwhelming grief during the pregnancy. After all, she always presented herself as deeply devoted to Sam. But this time, after I exposed her affair with Oliver, it was like a fuse igniting all the doubts that had been buried before. Sam's parents acted swiftly, and the truth was uncovered in no time. When I heard the news, I immediately decided to pay a visit to my soon-to-be ex-husband, Oliver. Things weren't going well for him now. After the scandal broke, the company's stock plummeted. Even worse, everyone thought he was faithfully taking care of his brother's son, only to find out the boy wasn't even his brother's. He had unknowingly placed a green hat on his own brother. Now, there's speculation everywhere that the child might actually be Oliver's. After all, why else would Oliver treat them so well? Even more shockingly, some people are beginning to suspect that Sam's disappearance is connected to this pair of scoundrels. Everything was unfolding just as I had hoped. Oliver's carefully cultivated reputation collapsed overnight, and I knew that the scrutiny of others, paired with my subtle smile, would surely drive Oliver mad. When Oliver saw me again, he was extremely agitated. Miranda, have you forgiven me? Please, go clarify everything to the public. Tell them that the photo was just a fake. You've always believed in me. I removed my sunglasses, giving him a sidelong glance, and with a slight wave of my hand, a man stepped out from behind me. Mr. Oliver. I am MS, Miranda's attorney. I'm here today for 2 reasons. First, I kindly ask you to sign the divorce agreement with my client, MS, Miranda. Second, please sign this share transfer agreement. Miranda. What are you talking about? Oliver. You should know very well. The 50% of the shares you currently hold were a gift designated to me by my parents back when we were married. I didn't care to argue about it with you, but times have changed. You're now my soon-to-be ex-husband. I deliberately emphasized those last 2 words. Watching the colors change on Oliver's face brought me immense satisfaction. Chapter 11. A week after our divorce, Oliver announced that he was going to marry Sophia. I wasn't surprised when I heard the news. Sophia still held 15% of Sam's shares. If Oliver and Sophia joined forces, their combined shares would surpass mine, allowing them to continue controlling the company. I couldn't believe how shameless Oliver had become. What had I ever seen in him to be so devoted for over 10 years? Suddenly, a call came through. It was the private investigator I had hired earlier. He was calling to inform me that he had found the person I had asked him to track down. When Oliver abandoned me in the freezing snow, it was a Chinese man who rescued me and saved my life. A life-saving favor is something you can never forget. The investigator worked quickly and immediately sent me a photo of the man. The moment I saw the photo, my pupils dilated slightly, and my eyes locked onto the man's face. It wasn't just anyone in the photo, it was none other than Oliver's good friend, Sam, who had been missing for 5 years. After learning Sam's exact location, I wasted no time and booked a flight immediately. It seems Sophia has been hiding many things, and Sam's disappearance may not have been an accident but rather the result of foul play. The moment I saw Sam, despite his dazed look, I instantly recognized him. He was the real Sam. No doubt about it. The bad news was that he had lost his memory. This confirmed much of what I had suspected. Amnesia was the only explanation for why he had been alive all this time but had never returned home in the past 5 years. While talking to the old fisherman who rescued Sam, I learned that when he found Sam, his head had been struck by a sharp object, and he was bleeding heavily. I recalled the events surrounding Sam's disappearance. That day, he had been out on a boat with Sophia, just the 2 of them. Unfortunately, the weather took a turn for the worse, and the boat encountered a storm on its way back. Sophia was the only one who returned safely. At the time, Sophia claimed that Sam had been swept away by a giant wave. But now, it seems more likely that Sophia had struck Sam's head with a sharp object and thrown him into the sea. If not for Sam's luck, Sophia's plan would have been flawless. Perhaps fate was on my side, as Sam ended up saving my life by sheer coincidence. And in the process, I uncovered the truth. Now, the priority is to help Sam recover his lost memories. Chapter 12. 3 months later, at Sophia and Oliver's wedding, I walked arm in arm with Sam, slowly entering the wedding venue. The guests in attendance looked on with curiosity, but when they saw the man beside me, everyone gasped in shock. As Sam and I approached Sophia and Oliver, Sophia's expression grew more panicked by the second. Oliver's face became more colorful, a mix of emotions swirling within him. It wasn't until Sam and I stood directly in front of them that Sophia managed to force a shaky smile and said, "Sam, you're alive. Why didn't you contact me or your parents during these 5 years? You have no idea how desperate we were." I looked at Sophia, whose face had turned pale, and at Oliver, whose face had turned as red as liver, and smiled softly. I heard about Miss Sophia and Mr. Oliver's grand wedding today, so I've prepared 2 gifts. The first one you've already seen, and the second is on its way. Sophia's face grew even paler, while Oliver, having calmed himself, regained his composure and frowned. "Miranda, what's your game? Sam, if you're alive, why didn't you come back all these years? What are you 2 up to?" As soon as Oliver finished speaking, the sound of police sirens echoed from outside. A series of uniformed officers burst into the wedding venue and approached Sophia. "Ms. Sophia, you are under suspicion for involvement in a premeditated murder case from 5 years ago. We need you to come with us." The guests were in an uproar, but the show wasn't over yet. After Sophia was taken away, The police turned to Oliver. Mr. Oliver, there has been a report of your involvement in economic crimes. We need you to come with us as well. Chapter 13. The day after these events, Sam held a press conference announcing his return and explaining everything that had happened. After going through so much, I decided it was time to start a new chapter in my life. Before that, Oliver sent a message through someone, asking me to visit him in prison one last time. Since I was the one who had put him there, I agreed to his request. In the prison, I saw Oliver in his prison uniform, unshaven and sitting there, looking defeated. A satisfied smile played on my lips. Through the phone, he began to explain. Miranda, that time I didn't abandon you when I was about to come back for you. Sophia drugged me. I was. Enough, Oliver. I didn't come here to listen to your excuses. I impatiently put down the phone, ready to leave, but Oliver stopped me. Miranda, if it weren't for Sophia, would we have made it in the end? I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him for a long time before finally saying, you know the answer, Oliver. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Oliver sitting there, stunned. Much later, I thought I heard the sound of Oliver sobbing, but it was already too late. After visiting Oliver, I also went to see Sophia. She had been sentenced to life in prison for premeditated murder. When I saw her, she had already lost her mind. Her hair was filthy and disheveled, and she sat there, staring blankly, occasionally bursting into laughter. According to the staff, she was about to be transferred to a psychiatric hospital. When Sophia saw me, her eyes suddenly lit up, and she lunged toward me with all her strength. Gripping the bars tightly, she stared at me with wide, crazed eyes and shouted, "It's all your fault! It's all your fault!" My plan was flawless. I looked at Sophia in front of me. Gone was the glamorous woman she once was. In her place stood a crazed shell of a person, like a monster wearing human skin. I whispered to her, "Sophia, everything that's happening to you today is your own doing. If you hadn't shown up that day, I wouldn't have been saved by Sam. Without being saved, I wouldn't have found him. Blame yourself for everything." Sophia had truly gone mad. After I said those words, she suddenly began banging her head against the wall, and after her head was bleeding, she sat there, smiling foolishly. But none of this had anything to do with me anymore. Chapter 14. Side story. I took over Oliver's company again. As I looked at the familiar trees and plants around me, I couldn't help but feel a bit nostalgic. Back then, Oliver and I returned to the country together and prepared the funds to establish this company. Every plant and tree here had my hard work and dedication behind it. Until the day we got married, Oliver told me, "Miranda, from now on, you can just enjoy life at home. Leave the work of making money to me." Blinded by love, I believed Oliver's lies and resolved to be a good wife and mother at home. It wasn't until I tore off Oliver's mask that I finally had the chance to return to the company. Luckily, it wasn't too late. In the few days I've been back at the company, I've felt incredibly fulfilled. As I reviewed the previous work records, I discovered that Oliver had been secretly embezzling funds for the past 4 years. The company had also strayed further and further from the path I had originally planned. Now, the company is slowly declining, and in a few years, it will likely go bankrupt. Just like before, Oliver proved to be short-sighted. If it hadn't been for me, the company would have collapsed long ago. I made bold moves, laying off a few leaders who were merely occupying positions, having been hired through connections. This quickly caused dissatisfaction among some shareholders, but I needed this opportunity to reorganize the company anyway. On the day we held the shareholders' meeting, they united and, by a narrow margin, forced me to step down as chairman. Some of them even mocked me, saying, "Miss Miranda, after 5 years as a housewife, you've probably forgotten how to hold a pen. Better get back home. There's no place for women in a man's workplace." I smiled as I lifted the thick stack of documents from the table and slammed them hard into the man's face. "You should open your eyes and take a look at how much the company's revenue has increased, and how many percentage points the stock has risen in just the month since I've been back." The faces of those middle-aged men turned ashen in an instant. Before they could react, I gestured toward the door. A man in a black suit, standing tall and confident, slowly walked in. It was Sam. He pulled out a document with the bold words "Share Transfer Agreement" written at the top. I opened the agreement and let every shareholder in the room take a look before turning my gaze to the group of troublemakers. A playful smile curled on my lips. Sensing the shift in the situation, the group quickly changed their tune and started flattering me. I pretended to be magnanimous, letting them off the hook. But as one of the shareholders took his seat, I casually remarked, "I seem to remember your son was taken into custody last month. Is he doing okay?" Watching beads of sweat form on his forehead and trickle down, I turned the conversation to other matters. After the meeting, I invited Sam to my office. "Thank you for coming all the way here today to help me." Sam accepted the cup of tea from my hand, his lips curling into a smile as he said in a clear voice, "Miranda, if it weren't for you, I'd really be dead. There's no need for thanks between us." Looking up at Sam, who looked healthier by the day, I spoke earnestly. "Sam, you saved my life in the snow. Now, this is separate, but I won't forget what you did for me." "All right then. So what's your plan after this?" I plan. I gazed at the steam slowly rising from the teacup and then said firmly, "I plan to go back to Iceland once the company is stable." Sam paused for a moment upon hearing this, but he didn't say anything. The next time I saw Sam was at the airport. He was there to see me off. He also finally told me what happened on the boat. It turned out exactly as I had expected. But what I hadn't anticipated was that Lucas truly was Oliver's child. I had met Oliver while studying abroad, but Sophia, Oliver, and Sam had known each other since they were children. Sophia had attended the same middle and high schools as them, but while Oliver and Sam were the stars of the school, Sophia was just an ordinary girl. Everyone thought that Sophia being with Sam was her good fortune. It wasn't until years later that Sam discovered Sophia had only gotten close to him to be near Oliver. And then I appeared, shattering Sophia's dreams completely. But no one could have guessed that she would go to the extreme of gambling her entire life on a scheme that had almost no chance of success. She manipulated her way into obtaining Oliver's sperm and used IVF to successfully create an embryo. Then she took Sam on that fateful boat that would encounter a storm. She knew that Oliver and Sam were close like brothers, and she knew that Oliver would take care of his missing brother's wife and child. And through this, she hoped to get closer to Oliver again. Every step of Sophia's plan unfolded successfully. But who would have thought that Sam was still alive and that I would be the first to find him? I asked Sam, why was Sophia so obsessed with Oliver? Sam gazed into the distance and slowly said, "Back in school, Sophia was bullied. It was Oliver who stepped in to protect her." Sam lowered his head, his eyes a little dazed, and in a hoarse voice, he added, "But back then, I was the one who told Oliver to help her." I opened my mouth to say something, but it felt as if my throat was blocked. In the end, I could only manage to whisper, "Life is unpredictable." As I boarded the plane and looked out at the scenery, Sam's words echoed in my mind. It felt like a heavy stone was pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. When I arrived in Iceland again, I reopened that little home, looking at everything that felt both familiar and foreign. I reached out my hand but pulled it back. I retraced the steps Oliver and I had once taken, revisiting dozens of places we had been together in Iceland. Finally, I returned to the place where we had chased the auroras. I mounted the snowmobile, revved the engine, and charged forward with all my strength. The weather forecast had said there would be no auroras tonight, but after 30 minutes of speeding ahead in the darkness, I saw a glimmer of light. I had seen the auroras countless times before, but never like this. The deep green light surged like waves, fading and then being reborn again. When I returned, I opened the door to our little home once more. This time, I looked at everything inside and acted decisively. With a blazing fire, I burned every memory of Oliver and me to ashes. Standing in front of the flames, I watched the fire burn, feeling a sudden sense of relief. From today on, the past is gone, and I will begin a new era that is all mine. The end.